So a young woman asks for an appointment with her pastor. She wants to talk to him about a growing sin in her life, which has her worried. And when she sees him, she says, "Pastor, I've become aware of the sin that's in my life, and I can't control it. Every time I'm at church, I begin to look around at all the other women, and I realize that I'm the prettiest one in the whole congregation. None of the others can compare to my beauty. What should I do about this sin?" And the pastor replied, "Mary, that's not a sin. That's a mistake." Wah, 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 wah. Ooh, okay. All right, so let's pretend that you're some electronic device, pick whatever you want, that has a low battery. Something that has a rechargeable battery. We'll go with the phone. All right? Something with a rechargeable battery. You need to get charged up again to be working properly. So you stop in somewhere and you ask, can I plug in here and charge up my battery? And the people there say, "Sure, we've got tons of outlets. Go ahead, plug in and fill up." Like, all right, awesome. Yeah. I think we have a problem. There. As you can see, none of these outlets are going to do us any good. It's not going to fit any of these. Those are all actual outlets. None of them can charge my battery. I need to find someone, somewhere, who has the right outlet to fill my battery. Now, this is actually one of the core concepts to the 5 love languages. According to Gary Chapman, the guy who created these things, he says we all have a love tank. Love tank. Not the love shack. Love tank. And it needs to be filled. You've got to fill that love tank up. I'm going to read you a quote off his website to get an understanding of where this comes from. He says, "I liked the metaphor the first time I heard it. Inside every child is an emotional tank waiting to be filled with love. When a child feels really loved, he'll develop normally. But when the love tank is empty, the child will misbehave. Much of the misbehavior of children is motivated by the cravings of an empty love tank." That specific quote is regarding children, but the idea of needing one's love tank filled up is a foundational concept of the love languages. And in the example I used earlier, if I have an American-style plug and all I have available are international outlets, which is what I showed up there, I can't charge my battery. It's not going to happen. In the same way, if quality time is my love language, and I'm only around people who use service or use words of affirmation to show love, then they won't be able to fill my love tank. I'll be running on empty, and according to this line of thinking, that can cause all sorts of issues in my life. Now, that idea does make some amount of sense, and it gives us a nice visual to help us kind of understand that I need not just love, but a particular kind of love. The concept does have some drawbacks, however, and that's what we're actually going to talk about today. You see, if you do some research on what people think about the 5 love languages, they fall into 2 camps. You have the people who feel that the love languages were quite helpful to them and it helped their relationships and helped them with some understanding. And then there's the people on the other side who think that they are a terrible idea, they're unbiblical, and in some cases evil. These are a disastrous thing for you to have in your life. Now, that seems like a pretty big difference of opinion there. And I will grant that the people who think that these are almost to the point of evil, the rest of their ideas are a bit far out there. So, but there is some merit in discussing these dissenting opinions. And we're going to cover 2 major points of dissension, one this week and then one next week, which is the last week for the series. To explain today's point, we're going to go back to the battery example. One of the problems with electronic devices that have a battery that you charge up is that they only have so many charges. After a while, the battery doesn't hold as much of a charge, and you have to keep charging it more and more until eventually you can't really charge it anymore. If you want to use that thing, you just pretty much have to leave it plugged in, and that's how you have to use it. That's the idea that we're looking at today. What happens when the love tank can never be filled? No matter how much love's poured into it, it keeps wanting more. It's never satisfied. It's never appeased. It's never happy. And interestingly enough, when this happens, as I dug into this and started thinking about them more and more, you find that the 5 love languages actually turn into the 7 deadly sins. It's kind of interesting. And the 7 deadly sins, of course, they're not actually biblical. You're not going to find the term 7 deadly sins anywhere in the Bible. But you can certainly find scripture to support that all of them are sins. But from our church history, we're pretty familiar with what these are: lust, envy, sloth, pride, greed, gluttony, wrath. So we're going to jump in here and see how love languages turn into deadly sins. First up, physical touch. Now, for all of these that we're going to discuss today, we're going to go through all of them. I want you to think about your love language. For the past couple weeks, we've been thinking about other people who have that love language. How do you love that person? Today we're thinking about you, your love language. If your love language is touch, you feel valued when others touch you or touching each other. It's a reciprocal love language. So when you're touching somebody, they're touching you. You're touching each other. So it gets kind of fulfilled either way. But what happens when that can't be fulfilled? What if the need it grows and it's fed and it grows and it's fed and it grows and it's fed and on and on and on? The love language becomes lust. The definition from the dictionary that best fits this is an intense longing or craving. It becomes an unhealthy reliance on the need to touch and be touched, which is no longer confined to any sense of propriety or morality. Now, the 5 love language concept doesn't allow for this. Once you fill the love tank, you're good. That's all there is to it. Somebody needs something, you fill the love tank, done. But sometimes you have to cut off the tap, so to speak. It's kind of like a bartender who's got somebody who's just super drunk, right? And so the bartender finally cuts him off. You've had enough, buddy. But the bartender wants more. Hey, I'd be happy if you gave me one more drink. But the bartender knows that's not true. One more drink's not going to make him happier. So he cuts him off. I told you previously when we talked about physical touch as a love language that it's not about physical intimacy. It's not necessarily about that. But when it gets twisted into lust, physical intimacy comes to the forefront. And this may result in all sorts of excesses that come to mind when one hears the term lust. Though it may also manifest itself in ways you wouldn't expect as well. And this is where you get into some of that weird Freudian territory, which we're not going to wallow in today. But some of that stuff comes up. Now, due to the inherently vulgar nature of this particular sin, I'm not going to delve into any examples or anything like that. All right, I'm sure you guys have some concept of what this sin is about. So we'll leave it at that. Just realize that all of these love languages take balance. You'll need to watch yourself to make sure that you keep that balance. And if you're in a close relationship with somebody else, you need to watch their balance because you're the one who may be overfilling with that tank. You're the one who may be feeding the problem and doing more harm than good. So we're going to move on to quality time. If this is your love language, then you desire to not only have people spend time with you, but that time needs to be meaningful and accomplish something. And this is another reciprocal love language. You spend time with someone else while they're spending time with you. You're both participating in it. But what if you always need to spend time with that person and you feel rejected if they spend time with anyone else? When this love language goes bad, it becomes envy. And probably a better, more common word today would be jealousy. It's not just that you feel valued when somebody is with you, but your sense of worth is completely tied to them being with you. Now, couples can be very close and desire to be with each other all the time, and that's not necessarily an issue there. But let's say that quality time is your love language, and you're in a relationship with someone, and that person decides to spend some time somewhere else or with somebody else. There's no funny business going on or anything like that. They're just spending some quality time with somebody else. Now, if you simply cannot handle that, if it completely empties your love tank, leaves you feeling betrayed and abandoned and ultimately very angry at that person for not being with you, then you may need to step back and examine how you're handling love. Because those are signs that this love language has spun out of control. You don't own their time. They give you some of their time because they love you. Now, it could be that you really are being neglected. The other person might practically never be around, and they give you very little quality time and spends lots of quality time with other people. And then it really is an issue about not getting charged up. And as you can see, it's not an easy concept to master. It takes a lot of balancing. It takes a lot of understanding and a whole lot of communication. So on to service. Service. If service is your love language, you feel loved when somebody does something for you. They may do some task you need done or don't like doing, or maybe they'll help you out with a task. The really important thing here is that the other person chose to do something that you wanted, or that shows that they care about you. When this love language goes wrong, the idea of choice goes out the window. It's no longer the other person choosing to do something for you to show their love. Instead, they must do something for you, or else they obviously do not love you. You go from having a relationship to having what basically amounts to a slave. You have stumbled into the deadly sin of sloth. Because you need constant filling of your love tank, you require constant service from that person. Stuff you're perfectly capable of doing, you push off onto them because they need to do stuff for you. You expect things from them without any regard for their own happiness, for their own well-being, for what they want to do. And that last point about the other person's happiness, this is another theme that you find through all the love languages when they go wrong. The other person stops being a person, and they simply become a means to an end. A way of getting something you want. You can think of generic examples of this, like a man who frequents prostitutes, or an overbearing wife who you can kind of imagine, and you see it in various comedic forms, where the wife, she goes through the department store and she's buying this and that, and you've got the meek husband following behind, and he's got stacks and stacks of boxes he's trying to balance. And those are kind of the same thing. One person is getting service from the other person without any regard for their happiness or their well-being. Now, there's more to be said on that idea, and we're going to come to it a little bit later at the end. Words of affirmation. If this is your love language, then you need to hear what people think about you, that they care for you, that they think you're doing a good job in order to feel loved. Actions don't do it. You need words. And they can be words of affection or praise or encouragement. Now, this one is actually a really dangerous one. It's something that's very subtle when it changes. And it may start really early in life. And it leads to what some consider to be the worst sin of all, which is pride. Not only do you need words to help feel loved, but now you constantly need other people to tell you or agree with you about how great you really are. I love me dearly, right? Now, when I was doing research on this topic, I actually ran into a great example of how words of affirmation twists into pride. I was reading an article written by a woman, and she was just getting back into the dating scene. She was getting into the internet dating scene, actually. And she contacted a man whom she seemed interested in. Their interests seemed to line up. and asked him to, start communicating. And he replied back that he would like her to take the love language quiz. He wanted to know what her love language was. I'll read to you what she wrote. My problem with 5 love languages is that I serve a God who is perfect in his love for me. He is not boxed in by categories. And if I want to love someone through him, I sure as heck don't want to be loving in a human category way. I want to love like God does. Now, this is kind of unfair because I've read the entire article and I've just read you a piece of it. But I could tell after reading that section that she was a very prideful person. All Christians want to love like God does. But we also understand that we're not God. We're in human bodies with human thoughts and human feelings, and therefore imperfect in our attempt to emulate the divine love. Not this woman, though. She's beyond humanity. She's beyond all that. She's certainly holier than Paul, who stated in Romans 7, line 14, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold under sin. For I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate." I'm glad that she's past that. Anyways, so after reading those lines from her, I thought to myself, I bet her love language is words of affirmation. I'm just kind of thinking about it. And so I kept reading on, and a few lines later it says, "Nonetheless, I took the test in the evening, just for jokes, and found out what I already knew. Words of affirmation was my highest score. I could have told you that without taking the stupid test." Well, I told you that without you taking the stupid test either. The rest of the article only served to confirm that she let her love language become twisted into pride. Now, bragging and boasting are certainly signs that this love language is going wrong. But as I mentioned, there's a subtlety to this sin as well. Take, for example, a woman who maybe, I'm sorry to pick on women, but that's what I'm thinking of right now. But like a woman who kind of like pouts or mopes, just trying to provoke a man to give her a compliment and make her feel good about herself, but it's not like she's really sad. She's just trying to get that compliment out of him. And, then he says something nice and she lights up and all right. The guy thinks I did something right. And she's training him. She's training him to keep feeding that pride. And that's not a good thing. But this can also be an unfortunate trait that we instill in our children. And certainly, you must let your children know that you love them and encourage them and build them up. But you also need to discipline them when necessary and let them know when they're wrong and let them know that they're not always great at everything. If a parent skips those steps, the child may develop a very prideful nature, expecting everyone to always say good things about them, and they get mad when people don't think that they're always great all the time. They get these expectations. So now, we're going to transition to receiving gifts. It's our last one here. For this love language, you feel valued when somebody gives you gifts. And not only does it show that they care for you, but you also have a physical reminder of the feelings that person has for you when they're not around. The gifts themselves are not really the focus, though. They could be big, they could be small, they could be expensive, they could be homemade. It's really the thought that counts, and it's the relationship that counts. When this love language goes wrong, though, you end up with the sin of greed. And this can manifest itself in various ways. The focus may shift to the value of the gift. It could be that to show that you love me, you need to get me more expensive gifts. Kind of keep ratcheting it up there, more and more expensive gifts. Or it could just go to the idea of gifts in general. Just you need more gifts. And even the sentimental attachment of the gifts are lost. And all that remains is the need to acquire more stuff. More stuff. With this mistaken idea that getting that stuff will finally make you happy. If I had that one more thing, it'll make me happy. If you got me that gadget over there, it'd make me happy. Never works, though. And it's pretty easy to see when this love language makes the transition, and the other person will probably know that they're being used. And so often this situation is only maintained if the gift receiver, the person who wants to get these gifts, actually gets pretty good at meeting the other person's love language. And you get this weird, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine sort of scenario, but it feels much more like a business agreement than anything that approaches the sacrifice of love. Like I said last week, love is a gift. It's a sacrifice. You'll notice over the last 2 weeks when we were talking about the positive parts of love, I had you think about loving other people. And then today, we're talking about the negative parts, I'm saying think about yourself. And that's not by accident. Love is outward focused. We know that our love is to be directed outward, first at God, then to our neighbor. When love becomes self-focused, when it's no longer a gift, but it is self-serving and self-seeking, that's when it starts to become something ugly, something sinful. And now that I've gone through all the love languages, you notice that my math didn't add up very well, and I said that 5 love languages become 7 deadly sins. So that leaves 2 sins left over, gluttony and wrath. Neither one of them fit particularly to any one love language, but they actually fit to all of them. Gluttony is wanting too much of something that you normally need. We normally think about it as food. You need food. But the glutton has too much of it. For love, it's having so much to the point where it's harmful, as we've been discussing. It's no longer being used for its actual purpose. You're not using love for its purpose, but simply as an addiction. That's all it is. Just like you're not eating food to maintain your body. It's just an addiction. And as for wrath, anyone who's been in a relationship with someone with a messed up or overboard love language knows that wrath is going to come along for the ride. Much like a drug addict or an alcoholic that's been cut off from the source of their addiction, they're going to be prone to violent outbursts. The love addict will use wrath to try and keep the supply going, causing misery to anyone who dares to back off the supply. Now, I feel I may have created a danger in showing both sides of the love languages. And that danger is that you'll only see one of the sides. That you'll pick the side that best suits the position that you happen to be in. And you won't work on achieving a balance. And I want to give you some examples here of what I mean. Let's say you're a quality time person. You're in a relationship with a service person, and you feel that your love tank is not being filled because the service person doesn't give you enough quality time and you're miffed at them. The service person feels that you've gone overboard on your quality of time needs. You've gone to the dark side. You're not allowing the service person any time but their own. You're being too demanding of their time. Now in the situation, both are focused on opposite sides of the love languages. And instead of coming together and finding the balance, finding out what's going on. The problem with these, or not really the problem, but you have to come together and discuss them and gain an understanding of them. Or you're just going to see opposite ends and you're always going to butt heads. Another common matchup might be a touch person with a words of affirmation person. If you're a touch person, you may feel that the words person isn't doing enough to fill your tank, not holding up their end of the bargain. The words person may feel that you're going too far. You need too much physical contact too often, to an unhealthy degree even. And once again, this kind of thing can be remedied if both people are willing to work together and understand the issue and have an open mind to see that, okay, maybe one person's going a little far, not enough, or whatever. But if you only look at one side, it's not going to work very well. Or here, let's flip it. Let's say that the words of affirmation person feels like the touch person isn't taking them seriously enough. You don't acknowledge my skills and my abilities and my accomplishments. You ignore all the good things that I do. And the touch person's just irritated that you're constantly bragging all the time about all the things that you do that are so great. When in fact, you seem to be all talking and don't do much at all. But again, it's a situation that's going to take work for both people. But it could go through. Now I'm hoping that when you combine, you got to combine them. You combine what you learned over the last 2 weeks, you combine it with what you learned today, then you can be pretty well prepared for whatever relationship you come into, for dealing with those different interactions with the relationships. Now next week, Next week, we're going to finish the series up. We're going to talk about one last disagreeing opinion that people have about the love languages. And in doing this, we're going to take a step further. We've talked about loving other people. We've kind of talked about our love language that we have. And next week, we're going to focus on the source of that love, as well as how love fits into our larger moral landscape. Amen.